Undercover boss sits for breakfast, freezes when waitress admits she's skipping meals for her kids. Not every morning is an ordinary morning, especially when your CEO is sitting in the middle of the diner, wearing a baseball cap, and ordering scrambled eggs like a retired old man. Wednesday morning. The sky was dotted with rain. Droplets clung to the front window of Sunrise Diner branch number 28, tracing soft, vague curves, like a veil covering a truth no one dared to lift. This branch, according to every report, was running smoothly. Customer loyalty scores were high, quarterly revenue stable, no serious complaints. In fact, just last week, Doug, the shift manager, was nominated for the Regional Operations Excellence Award. But Derek Langston, 52, CEO of Sunrise Hospitality Group, wasn't the type to be swayed by pretty numbers. Because what had been keeping him up for the past 3 weeks wasn't in an Excel file. It was in a single anonymous message sent to his personal inbox. "Mr. Langston, do you know who's actually getting the customer tips?" And so, on that rainy morning, Derek walked into the very branch being called exemplary. No luxury car, no assistant, no tie, no leather briefcase. Just a man in a faded baseball cap, a windbreaker, and a pair of worn-out sneakers that looked like they came straight from a 90s gym locker. He even borrowed a backpack from his son inside, only a small notebook and a ballpoint pen. Derek greeted no one, and no one noticed him. Perfect. He chose a single table near the window, Saturday down, nodded briefly at the waitress who walked up. She wasn't too young, not too tired either, but there was something in her eyes that hinted at a sleepless night. "I'd like scrambled eggs, toast, black coffee, nothing more." He smiled softly, his voice low just enough, like a lonely traveler or a man quietly easing into retirement. The waitress nodded and walked away. No suspicion, no recognition. Derek opened his notebook. Didn't write anything yet, just observed. At the cashier counter, 2 employees were chatting still, glancing at the POS screen every few seconds. A group of office workers had just walked in, sat near the counter, ordering big, constant coffee refills. Derek noticed. The one taking the order was Ryan, the one holding the POS. But the person actually doing the serving was the same waitress from earlier, carrying the heavy trays, speaking politely to every guest. He took a sip of the water that had been brought out first. The aroma of coffee from the next table drifted over, pleasant, but not enough to mask the persistent chill in the air. Something felt off. No one said it, but it was present, quietly, silently, like tiny cracks only the person who laid the foundation would notice. And this time, Derek Langston wasn't here to evaluate. He was here to listen. There are truths that don't need to be shouted. They just need to be blurted at the right time to the right person. Cassie brought the coffee over as swiftly as if she'd done it 1,000 times, and perhaps she had. Her steps made no sound. Her hands steady on the tray. Her face wore the perfect customer service smile. But her eyes reflected something else. As if behind each, "How can I help you today?" was a thin veil, carefully folded and tucked into her apron pocket, hiding exhaustion from view. Derek looked up from his notebook and gave a small nod of thanks. "The coffee smells great. Seems like a busy morning." Cassie smiled, nodded gently, and began pouring coffee into the ceramic mug in front of him. "Yes, morning shifts are always packed," she said, "especially on Wednesdays. Lots of office workers, lots of single-item orders, and they're sick." "So do shifts like this usually get better tips?" Derek asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. He was used to asking small questions to test reactions, but this time he was asking, like a middle-aged man genuinely curious about the lives of young people hustling through inflation. Cassie paused, just for a second. Her hand still held the coffee pot, slightly tilted. The cup had already been full. I'm not really sure," she said, then let out a soft breath, as if she had just slipped out of her comfort zone. "Actually, morning shifts are the worst for tips, especially when we have to share, and not everyone really gets a share." The words landed on the tableau like drops of coffee, but like shards of glass, silent but sharp. Derek didn't respond, but his heartbeat skipped a beat. She didn't look at him when she said that, and she had no idea that the man sitting in front of her wasn't just some retired uncle passing through town, but the CEO's man who once sat in a grand meeting room on the 29th floor, signing off on the tip-sharing policy based on digital receipts, working hours, and service percentages system he had believed was tamper-proof. But just one sentence was enough to give form to every lingering suspicion. Cassie quickly changed the subject, asking if he wanted more toast, more eggs. But Derek just shook his head. He wasn't hungry anymore, at least not for food. He watched Hertha Petite frame moving like a streak of light between tables, taking orders by hand, without a POS device. Meanwhile, Ryan, the male employee, sat at the counter, legs up, scrolling on his phone, the POS device right in front of him. As soon as customers finished ordering, payment was processed via card. The picture was starting to take shape. Its true colors didn't lie in the customer satisfaction reports. They were in the way someone like Cassie bent down to pour a full cup of coffee for a stranger while clearly living with an empty cup herself. And Derek Langston understood. This morning, he didn't come here to eat breakfast. He came to listen. And now, he had heard enough to begin. No matter how flawless a system is, it can still be bent by hands that know when to stay silent. Derek sat still, the coffee in front of him cooling with every moment he observed. No one paid attention to the man sitting alone in the corner with a thoughtful gaze and a hand always resting near the edge of a notebook. But he saw everything. He saw Cassie taking orders, non-stop single diners, and large groups alike, moving tirelessly, always wearing a smile, though her eyes were slowly clouding with exhaustion. He also saw Ryan, the young man, in a carelessly tucked-in shirt, always holding the POS like it was an invisible scepter. Jason wandered near the counter, joking around with a kitchen staffer, while Cassie carried a tray of drinks to table 5 and apologized to table 8 for the delayed order. And then he saw what could no longer be ignored. Every time a customer pulled out a card, the one handling the POS was never Cassie. Credit card? Ryan stepped in. Apple Pay? Jason swooped in. Cassie never protested. She simply smiled, stepped back, letting the other two conveniently take over. And in that exact moment, Derek understood. Digital tips automatically credited to whoever processed the payment were being manipulated. He opened the internal app on his phone. With his special access, Derek could view real-time tip allocation logs. And just as he suspected, in the 45 minutes he'd been in the diner, the system recorded 6 digital tip transactions under Ryan's name, 3 under Jason's, and not a single one under Cassie's. Even though he witnessed it clearly, Cassie was the one directly serving all those tables. This wasn't just about prioritizing the POS device anymore. It was about cutting her off from the tip pool intentionally. That night, Derek didn't go home. Instead, he stopped by the branch office under the pretense of a surprise inspection. Doug, the manager, seemed a bit surprised but still greeted him with a professional smile. Derek made small talk. "You're still using the automatic tip sharing system here, right?" Doug nodded. "Yes, still using the POS like the rest of the system, but there are a few exceptions, like for cash tips or cases where employees haven't been granted transaction rights yet. Sometimes we hold the tips until the end of the day and distribute them manually. It's more convenient that way. Hold them and distribute later." The phrase sounded harmless, but Derek knew behind it was a murky mechanism, enough to swallow every last cent without leaving a trace. And then, in a lightly encrypted folder within the internal system, Derek found the final confirmation, a list of employees classified under full POS access and limited POS access. Cassie, full name, Cassandra Taylor, was in the limited group, with a note, temporarily not granted access, awaiting manager's approval. And the final approvers? Doug and Ryan, Doug's nephew. Derek sat silently, his hand resting on the mouse, eyes locked on the screen. That girl, the one who served him breakfast, the one who had blurted out, "Morning shifts are the worst for tips." Turns out, it wasn't just because customers were stingy. It was because she was working in a system where she never even had the right to touch the part she rightfully earned. After closing the laptop, Derek leaned back in his chair, his heart heavy. Everything was no longer a hunch or a theory. He was staring at the underbelly of a model he himself had signed off on, now manipulated by those who knew how to exploit the loopholes in the founder's absence. He picked up his phone and called Lauren, the internal operations director, overseeing the tip-sharing system. Her voice was still sleepy. "Lauren, I need the tip allocation report from the past 3 months for branch number 28, sorted by each employee. Include the number of POS accesses, transaction logs, and timestamps for each operation." "Yes, I understand. Is something wrong?" Calling it wrong is an understatement. This is the only branch where the person holding the POS and the one actually serving customers are never the same. And no one's reporting it because the one getting shortchanged doesn't even have the right to speak up. After the call ended, Derek turned back to the screen. He pulled up Cassie's shift schedule. She was listed for nearly every morning shift. Her average number of tables served was nearly double that of other staff. But the total tips recorded under the POS system, 75% lower. And the strangest thing? Every weekly internal report from Doug ended with the same familiar phrase, "Morning shift stable." Cassie maintains good rhythm. Maintains rhythm, Derek repeated in his mind. Not earns strong tips, not gets good customer feedback, but maintains rhythm. Suddenly, Derek realized something. The system wasn't just being manipulated through tech. It was also being manipulated through language. The injustice here wasn't even being called by its name. It was wrapped in smooth phrases like, access not yet granted, held for lot or distribution, not suited for peak hours, internal balancing, all too polished, not sloppy enough to raise red flags, but just enough to ensure people like Cassie never got the chance to even think they were being wronged. Derek closed his laptop. He didn't need more data. What he needed now wasn't more evidence, but action. He grabbed his windbreaker and stepped out of the branch office. Night had fallen. Light rain misted his face, sharp enough to snap him into full clarity. On his way to the car, he paused behind the diner. The lights were still on. A lone figure was mopping the floor, moving slowly. It was Cassie, still here. The morning shift had ended hours ago, but she was the one wiping down the last stains of the day while the others, the ones who took her tips, had left more than an hour earlier. Derek didn't step inside. He just stood still, then pulled out his phone and typed a message to the regional board of directors. Suspend Q2 awards for branch number 28, requesting a full management team meeting tomorrow morning. Signs of labor benefit misallocation detected. And beneath that line, he added something he had never typed in his 10 years as CEO. I will personally attend. And a Zeit. Some mornings don't start with coffee, but with unfiltered truth. And this time, no one could avoid it. Friday, 7:29 a.m. The sun hadn't yet climbed high, but inside Sunrise Diner number 28, the morning shift had already slipped into its usual rhythm. Cassie was finishing up cleaning table 6. Ryan had just arrived with the POS device he always held so comfortably, and Doug the manager was behind the counter checking the morning delivery list. No one knew today would be different, until 3 black SUVs glided into the parking lot in near silence. The doors opened, and a line of company-uniformed individuals stepped out, white button-ups embroidered with the Sunrise logo, clipboards in hand, name tags reading, Internal Audit Division, HQ approval. The doorbell chimed. Cassie looked up first. Her hand was still holding the coffee she had just started pouring. The man at the end of the line, no name tag, no clipboard, wore only a dark jacket and carried a strangely calm expression on his familiar face. It was the Wednesday morning customer, the one who ordered a simple toast and asked about tips with what seemed like a casual interest. But this time, he didn't head for the corner table. He walked straight to the center counter, pulled the mic from the order station, and looked directly at every staff member frozen in place, as if time had stopped. I'm Derek Langston, CEO of this system, and I have something to say in front of all of you and every guest here this morning. And a shockwave without a shout. Doug dropped the pen in his hand. Ryan instinctively hid his hands behind his back, as if clutching some physical evidence of wrongdoing. Derek gave a signal. A member of the audit team stepped forward and placed a laptop on the counter. The screen lit up, displaying a real-time breakdown. Orders, server, POS handler, tips registered. The red column clearly showed the name Cassie T. Tables served. D suite. Tips received. 1. POS transactions for the other 17 orders. Ryan D. Derek spoke slowly. His voice wasn't raised, but each word struck directly to the heart. This system was built to distribute every tip fairly based on actual work, not to serve as a privilege for a manager's relative. He turned the screen toward Doug. You personally authorized the withholding of POS access for Cassie over the past 3 months without a single internal performance review. Meanwhile, Ryan, your nephew, processed over 90% of morning shift transactions despite not directly serving those tables. Doug stammered something, but no one was listening anymore. Cassie stood still, as if the space around her had vanished. She looked at the man before her, no longer a worn-out retiree or bored drifter. He was the man who created the very system she worked under. Derek turned to her. There was no drama, just confrontation, honest and overdue. No, Cassie, he said. I'm not a truck driver. But everything I witnessed here, it's all real, including the fact that your tips were stolen tips that rightfully belong to you. And that is something I, as CEO, will not allow to happen again. She didn't know what to say. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just stood there and for the first time felt protected. The air in the diner was heavy like forged iron. Every movement seemed frozen. Even the coffee machine, which usually hissed and groaned, had fallen silent. Only the quiet tapping of keyboards remained steady, Precise as the audit team continued extracting supporting data. No one left their spot. Even the customers who had simply come in for breakfast sat still, eyes shifting from the screen to Cassie, to the man who had just removed the mask of a CEO. Doug, the manager, clung to his last hope, the brittle confidence of someone used to covering flaws with corporate jargon. But this time, he wasn't facing a junior employee. He was facing the highest authority, someone who wasn't asking because he already knew. Prioritizing Ryan for POS use was to streamline service speed. He's quicker on the device, and I was just following the flexible procedures. Doug began, voice shaky. Derek raised a hand slightly, not loud, but enough to silence the room. He's faster at operating the system, Derek repeated, and Cassie is faster at serving, but only one of them got rewarded for the effort. A video clip played. A ceiling camera showed Cassie carrying a tray with 3 meals to table 14, while Ryan stood at the counter tapping the POS terminal. Another camera angle showed Doug handing a small envelope to Ryan after each morning shift. Every tip that was cut, Derek said, eyes fixed on Doug, is one less meal her child had. We didn't build this system to trade integrity for efficiency. Silence. Cassie still stood frozen, but her shoulders slowly relaxed, as if an invisible burden had just been lifted without her even realizing. Derek stepped forward, looking toward the HR team standing behind him. Cassie Taylor's POS access will be reinstated immediately. All unallocated tips from the past 3 months will be traced and paid in full within 24 hours. He then turned to the staff standing silently on both sides of the counter. Those who had knowingly or unknowingly remained quiet. And if any of you knew about this, if you heard or saw it happen, I don't blame you. But from today forward, silence is no longer a safe option. If you see something wrong and you don't speak up, you're helping it happen. His gaze stopped at a young employee, the one who had just turned 18 last week, looking conflicted as he had watched Cassie be left behind during yesterday's shift. The boy lowered his head, but this time, to nod. Derek turned back to Cassie. His voice softened. Cassie, I can't erase the last 3 months, but I can promise the months ahead will be different. For you, and for anyone who's ever felt their effort was invisible. Cassie pressed her lips together, this time to hold back a smile. She didn't say thank you, because in that moment, she knew the greatest thank you was simply knowing she no longer had to suffer alone. Trust, once lost, cannot be restored with promises. It only returns when someone dares to stand up and protect it day by day. A Wednesday morning, exactly 1 month later, rain still misted the window panes. But inside Sunrise Diner number 28, it was no longer the sluggish rhythm of a system running on habit. Everything felt like it had taken a new breath, lighter, steadier. On the oak pillar in the center of the diner, a new digital board had been installed. Live tips tracker, real-time, transparent, fair. Customers could now see exactly who received their tips. Employees could track their allocations immediately after each service. No more dark corners. No more relying on trust alone. Just look and know the truth. Cassie Taylor, now Manager Taylor, stepped out from behind the counter in a sleek charcoal-toned management uniform with subtle orange trim. Her hair was neatly tied up, and the new name tag on her left chest gleamed with every letter clearly etched. But the most noticeable change wasn't the name tag. It was in the way she walked. Steady, unhurried, unafraid of meeting anyone's gaze, and the smile on her face was no longer something borrowed for a shift. A customer sat at the corner of the diner where the morning sunlight had just reached. Still the same table, still the usual toast and black coffee. It was Derek Langston, no disguise, no pretense, just a customer, and a man who kept his promise. Cassie approached, gentle but resolute. "Good morning, Mr. Langston. Your usual table is ready." Derek looked up, returning a smile he no longer needed to hide. "I hope I'm not intruding if I stay for a bit," he said. "My morning shift hasn't started yet." Cassie chuckled, not at the words, but because, for the first time, they both understood that every morning shift here truly began from a day like that one. The diner was still lively, but no longer frantic. A young staff member had just served a nearby table, glanced up at the digital board, and saw a tip registered under his name. He gave a slight nod, not to confirm, but to acknowledge. He belonged in this system not just as a pair of hands, but as a person. Derek lifted the coffee cup. The same aroma, hot, strong. But this time, he didn't drink right away. He let it sit, feeling the warmth radiate through the porcelain, seeping gently into his fingertips. One cup of coffee doesn't create justice. But if it's poured by someone once overlooked, set down before someone who once stayed silent, and shared in an atmosphere of transparency, then maybe, just maybe, it's enough to begin something lasting. Derek set the cup back down, his eyes still on the counter, where Cassie was now helping a new employee straighten their collar before the shift began. He couldn't hear what they said, but that final nod, that gentle pat on the shoulder, said everything. Once pushed outside the system, Cassie was now the one handing opportunity forward, not with authority, but with empathy. On the wall behind the counter, a new wooden frame had been hung, modest in size, unpolished, not gilded. Just black letters painted across its face. Not everyone who arrives first is more capable. Not everyone who stays quiet agrees. And no one should work in a system that fails to call their effort by its true name. Cassie had suggested that sentence. Derek approved it immediately, no edits needed. Every day, that frame quote was wiped clean with the same care as the kitchen. It wasn't mandatory, but everyone did it. Because when your own labor is seen and valued, you learn to recognize the value in others too. Across the diner, an elderly customer asked for a coffee refill. A young employee turned back and moved quickly. He didn't call for Cassie's help. He didn't seek out a manager to check first. He picked up the pot and walked straight over. Initiative, sometimes it only emerges when someone feels they have the right to do what's right. Derek smiled to himself. He had once thought it would take a fortune to change this culture, but in truth, all it took was starting with the right person. A soft voice spoke beside him. Derek, end the day. It was Lauren, regional HR lead, stopping by to check the new permissions board. We're planning an internal training session, using branch number 28 as a model for others. Cassie's been nominated to lead the session. What do you think? Derek nodded, his eyes still on his coffee. Just make sure no one asks her to speak up louder or recount the injustice she faced. Let her talk about something more important, how to survive in silence while still holding on to a sense of justice until someone finally hears you. Lauren smiled. And now, someone has. Derek didn't respond. He lifted his cup and took a small sip. It didn't need to be hot. It didn't need to be strong. It just needed to be poured by the right person, placed in the right spot, at the right time, because sometimes what revives a broken system isn't replacing all the parts, but simply listening to the very first fracture before the silence spreads.